Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Moments with the Master. My name is Albert Dixon, and I am the preacher at Mill Road Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And with me is my good friend, John Henry, who is the preacher at the Church of Christ in St. Leon's, Indiana. And we certainly are looking forward to our spending time together with Moments the Master, studying and learning from God's Word. If you have any questions or comments in regards to the program, we invite you at the end of the program, you'll be provided information where you can contact us. And also, you will, as you go to our website, you'll find out more about each of the congregations where John and I work at. And also, I know with the congregation there in St. Leon, Indiana, John, you guys have a meeting that's coming up, and I'm sure
this starts this Sunday with Ron Roberts, and we'd encourage anybody out there who's listening to come and be with us and listen to some old time gospel lessons. Of course, it's going to be Monday through Friday next week, 7:30 each evening, and then Sunday at 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship, and then 6 p.m. in the evening for another worship service. I'm glad you brought that up. I'd forgotten all about it.
I thought it would be a good opportunity because, there's a lot of information that is provided. And if you're interested in learning and growing even more so, these are opportunities that are provided for you to be able to continue to grow and learn about God and His will so that you can be right with Him. Also, if you have any family members or neighbors that would be interested in a program like that, let them know about it. And that each Thursday evening at 7 p.m. is where we spend moments with the Master. We have been going through a series of lessons or studies in regards to the revelation or the bringing about of God's people in the redemption of God's people or mankind through Christ Jesus. And we've been looking at how these things unfolded, looking at the history and learning a lot of things as you see God at work in bringing about and fulfilling the promise that He made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now we are in the book of Exodus, which really is the beginning of the redemption process of God's promise to Abraham about his descendants being in Egypt and then coming up out of Egypt. And so now that they are there, they prospered, they multiplied. And then in our last session, we mentioned in chapter 1, there was a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. Right. And because the children of Israel had multiplied, the Pharaoh he saw it as a threat. And so he really increased the labor on the children of Israel. But, what was interesting, they continued to multiply. And so he gave a decree for all of the male children to be slaughtered. And we have the midwives who did not heed that. Right. And you can see God blessing them, establishing them.
We talked about that a little bit last week, but what was so unusual about that, here was Pharaoh who could have put them all to death, but they turned around and told Pharaoh more than that, we're afraid of their God. Right. I mean, Pharaoh's supposed to be a God,
right?
But we fear their God more than we do you.
Absolutely.
And so I just thought that was interesting.
And I'm glad you brought that up because you begin to see again how God blesses those who are faithful and are willing to put their lives on the line for Him and be obedient to it. And He did. He blessed them and established their household. And so that brings us to chapter 2. And chapter 2 begins with dealing with the deliverer that is going to come in this deliverance process from the Israelites from Egypt. And as they will begin that journey, go on that journey to the land of Canaan. But there's a few things that must take place first. And in that, chapter 2 covers the beginning of those things. Yeah. And that's where we'll be talking about the birth of Moses. Go ahead.
Well, basically, I was just going to say, when we look at it as we're going to, the first 15 verses, or 16, somewhere in there, cover the first 40 years of Moses' life just that quick.
Right.
And so, 40 years, that's a lot to, a lot of time passing there. And, sometimes when we think about Moses, we might see Moses as a very young man when he does what he does and leaves, but he's not. He's 40 years old at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, but anyway, as we take a look, we learn there, beginning in verse 1 and 2, that, of course, it said there went out a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. When she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrush and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. Well, of course, Moses' mother and father here, and one of the interesting things is sometimes we're always jumping to we always talk about, he was hid in the ark on the Nile River, but first he was hid for 3 months.
Right. Yes.
And I would imagine that would have been hard to do, because a newborn baby sometimes has a tendency, as I recall, to cry.
Yes.
So cry a good bit, and she would have to keep that child, quiet.
Right.
Because if they had found out, they would have took it and put it to death. Another thing, I think, Albert, that we kind of just barely talked about here before the program was this idea of a goodly child. Now, somehow that gave her some kind of indication that God was going to use this child for something special, or the child was going to be something special. And I don't know how all that works, but we can also over in the book of Acts in chapter 7, it brings this up again, so a little bit, and so evidently there must be a little bit to that. Right. I mean, we're not given the details, of course, but we can infer from that, because when she saw he was a goodly child, that's when she took and hid him for 3 months, and then put him out there in the bulrushes. And then, of course, Moses, we learn, is going to be from the tribe of Levi, which is going to be very important, because later on when the tabernacle is built, that is where the tribe of Levi is where the high priests are going to come from.
Right. And
so you've got Moses and Aaron, and they're going to step into that office first.
Right.
And so you have this also taking place here, and just pointing out some of these things. And so.
John,
go ahead.
I want to point out that thought about the Levi, where the priestly tribe would come, the high priest and everything would come from the tribe of Levi. And here you can see this consistency later on as you learn more and more about, well, how did they come up with the tribes or the priests that would be doing the sacrifices and so forth. And here you can see that consistency with the history of this coming about, and noticing how Moses is coming from the tribe of Levi, or of the house of Levi. So this harmony,
right,
and helps you to further understand that. And that's why one of the reasons why we're going through this history the way that we are, so that you can see the development of these things. And then later on, if you want to search out other details, you can do that. But these are giving the brevity of that, so that we can see how it unfolds and see how the consistency and this information is information that we can put our trust in as it is revealed to us. And as you were pointing out, John, in dealing with the first 40 years in these verses here from verses 1 through 14, it's real brief. But that's a lot of time. A lot of things happen
Right.
within these 40 years that the Bible doesn't talk about into great detail, but it lets us know that these things did come about, and this is the beginning of it. And I think it's a very good picture for us to help us to see those kinds of things.
Maybe another thing I think is important here is, sometimes, I know when I was a lot younger, when I'd study about this, I always was curious, how did Moses learn all this anyway about the Hebrews?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's some, evidence right here that when Pharaoh's daughter was down there along the river and found him, Miriam was not that far off.
Right.
And she went running, hey, you want me to find you a maid? So she goes and gets, her mother, really. But you, from what I've read, his mother probably would have had him at least 4 years, raising him.
Right.
In those 4 or maybe 5 years, when a child is that young and you begin to teach them, they're going to remember that. Remember those things. And I'm sure that, repetition, constantly reviewing these things, because, the Bible said when he got older, as we go down through here and read, when he got older, he remembered all this.
That's right.
Because the Bible's clear about, I'm going to go down and see my brethren. Well, his mother probably taught him that.
Yeah.
Now, it's possible that as he got older, maybe, Pharaoh's daughter, who took him for a son, possibly, this is how where you came from about.
Right.
And then, of course, I doubt it, that would have probably been about it. I don't know how much she would have known about the Hebrew people that lived there at the time, because of the Pharaoh and the way he was, like you said in the beginning, the way he was treating them. He was afraid of them because they was growing and multiplying already, and he looked at it from the negative viewpoint, what they could do, instead of from a positive viewpoint, the blessings that could come from the people if he would have treated them right.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you another thing, John, that I look when I see this, I'm impressed with Pharaoh's daughter as well. Because when she finds Moses in this basket, he's crying. And she has pity. She has pity on him. And I thought that was very a very good thing there in verse 6, as she had this pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. And there was a declaration for all the male Hebrew children to be slaughtered. And here she is. I think
that's a great point you made, because I saw the same thing, and I was going to, but I'm glad you did.
Right.
But that's really interesting that she had this pity, compassion, and mercy on him like that, and even though sometimes we are quick to judge.
Right.
Like other nations and people. Right. But see, deep down inside, she was a human being just like anybody else.
That's right.
And, but she had to submit, so to speak, to her father.
Right.
And all this. And like I said last week, I pointed out that we found out that the daughters of Pharaoh were independent. They were allowed to rule their own little space, and, but father was still over everything. And so that's basically how she was able to, I guess, I don't know if I want to use the term get away with it, but but anyway, she probably was able to keep it quiet by doing that.
Absolutely. So. And as you had brought to the attention that Moses' sister, Miriam, is standing and watching all of this, and then when Pharaoh's daughter has this compassion, as she comes over and as you pointed out and says, let me go get a maid who can nurse him for you. And the Pharaoh's daughter, again, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And then Miriam goes and get their mother.
Right.
And like you were pointing out, and I thought those are some very good points there, John, about that as you were making that. And you're looking at how all of this is developing and bringing about. How would Moses know? And that kind of influence. And here was another thing, too, is that Pharaoh's daughter, ends up paying a wage.
Yeah.
To Moses' mom for taking care of him. So it's amazing that how all of this works out. And again, but that does not negate the fact that Pharaoh's daughter is impressive in this situation as well.
But there again, you've got the providence of God.
Absolutely.
Think about that, just like Joseph.
Yes.
I mean, look, Joseph goes down in there, and but yet, God had a plan for him.
Right.
But and here is Moses' mother, and I mean, wow, that would be really something that not only is his mother going to get to have a hand in raising him, but she's going to get paid for it.
Right. Absolutely.
And so that would have helped. That would have been a blessing to that family.
Yes.
To be able to have probably that money and buy the things that possibly were needed or whatever it might have been. But anyway, I think that's a great point. And again, providence of God in the scheme of redemption.
Right.
God's blessings, God's watchful care.
Yes.
I mean, it's just laid out there. It's all there for us.
So these very valuable lessons to help us to see these things. And as we are further looking at these verses, John, then that takes us into verses 11 through 14, where as Moses has grown up, and as you said, as he gets older, now he ends up going to with Pharaoh's daughter to live there, and he is recognized, he's adopted by her into their family. So he still is impressed by the mom teachings. Knowing who he is, Moses that is, he knows who he is. And it tells us that in verses 11 through 14, that in those days Moses had grown up, that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And then the Bible tells us, so he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. In other words, he killed him for beating on a fellow Hebrew. And so you see this dynamics here starting to develop something else. And then as he went on the next day, it says he saw now two Hebrews fighting each other, and he says to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion? Why are you doing this?" And he said, and they said to him, "Who made you a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." And so you have this. Sure, years have gone by. But notice how he knows who he is, and what Moses does. He actually stands up for the defenseless here, with striking the Egyptian and killing him, and then recognizing, hey, you two are our companion, your brethren. Why are you fighting? Why are you doing this to each other like this? So you see that impressioned mindset given to him by his mom,
right,
or his family, as well, because I'm sure Miriam had a part in this as well, since she is the older sister.
The another interesting thing to me here is when we read, Moses had one of the best education at this particular time. And doing some research on this, I found that the kings would send their sons to Egypt to get educated. It would be something today comparable to, I guess, maybe what we would call maybe an Ivy League school or something.
Yeah.
And so they would send them down there, and they would be educated down there.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. And the next thing is, I found out too that we can, according to what I read, we can know almost basically what Moses would have studied when they went down there because of evidence
Right. Yes.
that has been found.
Right.
And as far as long as there are archaeologists out there digging in the dirt, we keep finding things.
More and more, absolutely.
Yeah, because all the time you hear about they're finding things, and I think as what you just said back to that is that that Moses, he's up in age, about 40 years old or close to it anyway, and. Right. He, this particular incident happens where he kills the, Egyptian, and then, later on, says something to the two Hebrews men that evidently were fighting with one another. But here's a case where he's 40 years old, but it seems to me like his mother's teaching and then just general teaching, he's mature.
Right.
And the thing that's interesting, Moses makes a mature decision at this point, like you already said. Yeah. But he's decided that, as the Hebrew writer said back over in the book of Hebrews 11:12, he's decided not to pursue the kingship of Egypt, but instead suffer with the people of God.
Right. Yes.
And so you see him doing this, and this is the beginning of his suffering, because what you just read, when they found out, and he said, "Surely this thing is known." Well, he's saying that's probably got back to Pharaoh by now.
Right. Absolutely.
And sure enough, it had.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah, and you're looking at this comparison, that choice that you mentioned, John. That here is someone making that choice. That tells you that faith in God helps us to overcome the challenges, and in some cases properly use the knowledge that we have. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have this knowledge and education, we get puffed up, and instead of using it to help and to glorify God, we use it for our selfish ambition. But you didn't see, as you pointed out, you don't see that with Moses. You see him willing to suffer with God's people because his faith is in God. And it is a faith that is developing and it is growing. Sure. And that's the way it is with all of us. When we choose God, we don't know everything right away. In fact, we're going to have questions. And we're going to see that even with Moses as we continue this study over in chapter 3. We'll see that. And so again, we learn that Moses' choice is he'd rather suffer with God's people than to enjoy or be a part of the passing pleasures of sin, as the Hebrew writer expresses in those passages that you mentioned, John, over in Hebrews chapter 11.
I want to just turn over here because I think, in the book of Acts, chapter 7, it gives us some more information about all this. And I think unless I misunderstand what Stephen said, but I think Moses was maybe trying to, like the other, patriarch, trying to do this on his own without, because it says here in chapter 7 of Acts, beginning with verse 23 down through verse 29, and when he was full 40 years old, and it came to his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel, and seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver him, but they understood not. Now that's interesting because, well, let's put it this way, he supposed wrong.
You're right. Absolutely.
But anyway, he had some inkling of what was going on here. Right. I mean, with him, but yet it wasn't time yet, and right. he's kind of jumping ahead of God, and then he in verse 25, he it says here that Moses thought that they would have understood what he was doing.
Right.
But then he turns around and said, well, they didn't understand. Yeah. And then it said in verse 26, the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do you wrong one to another?
Right.
But that he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And of course, that one verse, without looking at anything else, verse 29, there's the next 40 years.
Right, exactly.
And he's a shepherd.
That's right.
But I find that interesting how he, kind of played or portrayed in some respects the other patriarchs and some of the funny things that they would do.
Right.
Well, it's not that Moses didn't have a concern. He was concerned about them. He really wanted to help. I believe he was genuine.
Sure, absolutely.
But he didn't wait on God, and that's what happens when we don't wait on God. We try to get ahead of God.
Right.
It's just like, the children of Israel, when they're going to come up to the land, God's going to lead them up there and said, okay, Gwen, well, let's spy out the land. And then they come back with that false report, and, God says, and then, said what he had to say, and then all of a sudden the people say, okay, we're going to go take it. Moses says, no, don't go take it. And they try to, and they get wiped out.
Right, yeah.
Because they didn't listen to God.
Absolutely.
And so you've got a little bit of that here with Moses trying to settle these conflicts, hoping the people would try to understand. But that's not the way God's going to get them to understand, as we can see.
Right.
He's going to send Moses down there to Pharaoh.
Right. Yeah.
And I suppose you're going, but touch on this. But that was God's way, because God had something to show the children of Israel and
right.
Egyptians.
Absolutely.
And that was His mighty power.
Absolutely.
You're not going to defeat God.
That's right. And I think that's part of the whole process of the book of Exodus. It's about God, learning more about Him. And this is where Moses is. Moses has to learn about God, just as you and I, as we are growing in our faith, to put our trust in Him. And sometimes we do want to take matters into our own hands. And it's true, sometimes they do work out to accomplish a greater task, especially with Moses, as you've mentioned. And now, like, the next 40 years seems to be where God is molding him to trust me and not in you, in your own might. And as you so well put that, John, I think that helps us to begin to see the next 40 years of his life in this molding process of being that instrument for God.
Real good comment that you made. I had to jot that down. Learn about God.
Yes.
Notice Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all these different men. They were human, but they all had to learn about it. They all had their faults.
Right.
That's and right. I remember you pointing that out when we were studying some of these things, how that, we watched their faith grow.
Right.
Abraham, we saw it in Isaac.
Yes, we did.
And then, Jacob.
Yeah.
And so, these, like you said, these men, they knew God, but yet, God had to bring them along His way.
Right, yes.
In order to get them to understand things, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the Bible lesson is about God.
Right.
And the learning process that we go through, because remember, it was with Adam and Eve, they didn't listen to God and the consequences. And then you start to see when we don't listen to God or trust Him, we run into these consequences. My friends, we are out of time. And I'll tell you what, it goes by fast when you're really diving into these things and seeing how everything works in this unfolding of God's plan to redeem man. But we invite you to join us next Thursday at 7 p.m. as we continue with Moments with the Master. And we pray that you'll be blessed as you continue to follow and study God's Word.